Welcome back to the Shadow Priestess Embodied. I'm your host, Kaylyn Rutkowski, and thank you for joining me today for another deep dive and exploration into your inner world, into your body, the shadow realms, where we will begin to explore some of these esoteric principles and really begin to drop them down into modern day application and embodiment. This is a sacred place where you can begin to truly meet yourself, meet your medicine, and to meet your magic. This is a place of remembrance. Take a deep breath and let's begin. Welcome back, gorgeous humans, for another episode of the Shadow Priestess Embodied podcast. You guys, this is probably one of my favorite episodes to date. I bring on Dr. Jennie Ward, who truly has an incredible and unique unfolding that I knew I had to share with you all. Jennie is a clinical psychologist who grew this 7-figure, just absolutely incredible, successful business, who really started hearing the call and felt that God was leading her somewhere else. Jennie sells her 7-figure business and goes all in on her soul destiny and following the path as an oracle and as a high priestess. I think that her story is one that is truly inspiring, one that can really give us the inspiration and motivation to really begin living our own unique soul-led path. And if you're a woman who maybe has been wondering, am I a priestess? Do I carry some of these templates or coding? Then this is an episode you want to sit down and tune in for. Jennie is an advisor to leaders, business owners, and high achievers. She is a CEO who owned a 7-figure business and sold it for top dollar, let me just tell you, a clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience, an oracle, a guide, a high priestess, and someone who I deeply love and respect. Jennie works with leaders who really desire to accelerate their impact and improve their life through work with a high-level advisor able to use ancient wisdom and modern and practical mythologies. Honestly, you guys, Jennie has such a unique approach to how she works with clients. She has this just tapped in ability to really see what isn't being seen, what isn't being said. And I know that you are going to take away so much wisdom, guidance, nuggets, gems, and just pure inspiration for what is possible for you after this episode. So without further ado, let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. All right. Welcome back, beautiful people, to the Shadow Priestess Embodied podcast. Today, I have a special treat for you as I'm going to be sharing with you one of my dear friends, Jennie Ward. And Jennie has a very interesting path. And that's why I really wanted to bring her on and just share what that's really looked like and the unfolding of that with you all. So, Jennie was or is a clinical psychologist who is now really owning her unique spiritual gifts, her essence, and stepping into a high priestess identity. And I think those are two completely different worlds that you so beautifully have bridged together. So I would love for you just to share a little bit about who you are, what you do in this world, and tell us about how you became the high priestess that you are today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kaylin. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for today. So, it's a loaded question, and I will I'll give the bullet points that are the most important. So basically, I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a psychologist. I decided at age 12, and I'm still not entirely sure where that came from because I'd never met a psychologist before. I grew up in a really small community, and we didn't have one there. But I think I maybe read it in a book. I was a voracious reader, or I got to watch a tiny bit of TV. We really didn't watch much TV growing up, and we didn't have the internet, but I might have seen it on TV. And I just pursued that relentlessly from that point forward. I do have kind of an intensity to me where when I decide to do something, I like go way beyond
I've
usual.
seen it in action.
Yeah, so it's, a lot of our traits can be, wonderful gifts, and also sometimes I can be a little bit too intense, and, I can get into burnout easily because I just have this capacity to push myself, even beyond my limits, so I have to be aware of that. So I continued my schooling. I went to university for 12 years and became registered as a psychologist. And I thought, oh yeah, this is my path. This is what I'm going to do forever. And I worked for the military, the Canadian military system, for a number of years and developed skills and abilities in healing trauma and refined my skills there. And I also really learned how to work with men in that job. It was men that wouldn't normally go to therapy, and, but they had this very intense experience. The time that I worked there, it was the Canadian military's kind of height of involvement in the war in Afghanistan. And so it was a very intense job, and I absolutely loved working there. But I began feeling the call to, I'm a natural entrepreneur. I love entrepreneurship. I love running businesses and all that entails, which not everyone loves that stuff, but I really do. So I decided to just gradually move into running my own practice. I thought it would be very gradual, but true to form, I very quickly moved into that full time, and then very quickly started hiring staff. And I developed a business called Ward and Associates Psychological Services. That was very, it was very successful, and I had many psychologists working for me. And I developed it to a point where, it's kind of the dream of an entrepreneur, that it was financially successful. I could step back and not work as much. I had a beautiful culture there. Everything was going well. It was really the goal from 12 years old. I had achieved the goal. But all the way through, I felt this desire and this yearning for learning about spirit and energetics. And, I was just always so fascinated by that. So, when I did trainings, we always have to do, psychological trainings, and I was always doing those, but I was way more interested in, spiritual types of courses and experiences. So I was always doing that, thinking that, well, I'll just do this on the side for my own personal interest. And little did I know I was developing, skills and abilities and knowledge and activations that would serve me well in the role that I'm playing today as a high priestess. So you were instrumental and involved and witnessed me in my transformation, in my decision to step out of my identity as a clinical psychologist and into an identity that is a better fit for who I really am, which is
Mhm.
high priestess, spiritual advisor, and leadership mentor. And so that is, I sold my business, I sold my company earlier this year, and I've stepped fully into that role.
Mm. Gosh, that is so beautiful, and it's so powerful to me because you and I were talking briefly before we got on this call, and spirituality has become really mainstream and more accepted and welcomed by the masses. And I'm just curious, even with it looking a lot different today than it used to, were or was there any part of you that felt resistant to really letting go of, the title? Not that it's gone, but being Dr. Jennie Ward, to really stepping into and owning that, like, I actually am a high priestess. I am an oracle. Like, what did that journey really look like for you? Like, was there resistance?
Yes. Oh, there was so much resistance. It was really, really difficult for me. I think one of my struggles in this life is I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and
Mhm.
I'm sure many of your listeners can identify with that. And I also, I was running this very successful company, where I had a reputation of, being this psychologist that used evidence-based practice, very science-based types of approaches, and everyone knew me as that. And I definitely did that. And also, I had this other piece of me that I kept very hidden. And
Yeah.
I had a lot of fear around, okay, if I open up and start being more vocal about some of these other aspects of me, what will that do to my company? That was one of my
Mhm.
biggest fears because I felt very responsible for the people who were working for me. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to be known as, this is the company with this crazy lady running it. And, I had this fear that that would be, I would start ruining my reputation that I'd spent, decades forming. And so that was a real initiation that I had to walk through, where I
Mhm.
had to just decide, I actually don't give a shit what other people think about that. And if they
Yeah.
judge, if it causes the company to fall apart, I'll just have to figure that out. And of course, like most fears, that didn't materialize, even as I started
Mhm.
really being open about it. And I started my own podcast and started another company working in this spiritual domain. Nothing that I ever saw ever happen in that way. So I had to really let go of that concern and just embody the full version of me. And I think when we do that, magic really happens.
Yeah. And I can honestly resonate and relate to so much of what you're sharing, and I bet a lot of people listening can that. I've been on this journey for over a decade where I just fell in love with all things metaphysics, energetic, spirituality. It was like this hunger that I like couldn't feed enough, and I still feel that way. And that's how I know that this is what I'm here to do. But early on, I was also afraid. Like, what happens when I really step into this and people know that I have these gifts or that I talk to spirit? And I always joke and say I was like a closet spiritualist for so long, but like you're saying, it's like I got to this point where it's like this fire inside of me and this passion was so big that I was willing to let everything else burn to the ground, and I was willing to lean into the fear and to be seen and to be judged because my true self, my authenticity, my essence, my magic was like ready to pour out of me. And it was like, well, what will really happen when I honor this and I lean into this and I nurture this and I lead with this? And literally, that's when life just started to change rapidly. So I think that this is such a beautiful message to all those people who maybe are also hearing the call and they feel like they're being called to more or to lean into their expression that, like, when you do that and you take that leap into that risk portal into the unknown, that what God, spirit, universe, whatever you want to call it, has on the other side for you is like far beyond anything that you can dream of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't realize that you also went through this. I only met you, I think, after you had probably been through a lot of that process. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. I do think it's a bit of a rite of passage that many of us go through. And it's one of those initiations that takes us to the next level. And we have to kind of step up to the plate and be ready to let go of everything that is safe, that is traditional.
Mhm.
I joke that I went from psychologist to psychic, which, psychologist is much more, revered in the traditional world, right? And so I
Yeah.
had to just let go of needing to be seen that way. And yeah, it's been a beautiful unfolding.
Mm. What would you say was one of those big, like, pivotal moments where you felt like you were kind of on your knees with God, that you knew you had to really lean into your fear? Can you, like, trace or track that back in your system?
Oh, there's been a number of them. The more recent one that I went through was deciding to sell my company. And
Mm.
so I had been in a mentorship relationship. Um, and my mentor, I was talking to her about, I'm just kind of struggling with running the two companies. So I'd started my new company, the Wisdom Portal, which is my spiritual advising and leadership mentoring company. And I was still running my old company, Ward and Associates. And I had set up Warden Associates to be basically, independent. I really didn't need to do very much at all. I had staff running things, everything was smooth and it should be easy. But I kept finding that I was getting pulled into, spending more time in Warden Associates than I really needed to be. I don't know. I was struggling with that. And so I was telling her about this. I was thinking maybe we needed to like hire, an intermediary, like a staff member that could do more of the roles that I was doing there, even though I was barely doing anything from my perspective. And she said to me, "Do you think that maybe you're ready to sell Warden Associates?" And I just remember I was like, "Absolutely not." Like I was so resistant
Yep.
about it. Like that is not in my plan. That was not, I achieved this goal. Why would I just let that go? Like, I had to really examine that question. And my first response was definitely not, I did not feel that that was the path. But of course, I gave myself some time to really reflect on that and to examine that question. And within a couple of weeks, I realized, yes, I am ready to sell it. And so that was I didn't know a single psychologist in Canada who'd ever sold their company. It's a more common thing in the US, but the way we design our companies here, it's a bit trickier to sell. And
Mhm.
so I was just like, even if I want to, I don't think that I can. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to go for it, and if it works, it works, and we'll hope that things unfold in the way that they are meant to, and they did. But it was,
Mm.
I can say, oh, I sold my company, but it was like a heart wrenching. It was a
Yeah.
very challenging experience that I went through in this past year. Logistically, it was challenging. Emotionally, it was challenging. It's typical to kind of not tell anyone that you're selling because it can really disrupt the company. So I had to keep this big secret. And so it was
Yeah.
a very emotionally tumultuous year because of that.
Yeah, and, like, what's coming to my mind as you're sharing that is, like, it was almost like that was the final offering. It's like by you being willing to really, like, let that go and let that baby and that dream that you had since you were 12 years old, right, so wrapped up into, like, your identity and who you were, it was like to me, it was like that was the final offering to really, like, pledge yourself to being a high priestess and, like, to this new path that is so aligned and that God is calling you to, but it was like that was, like, that last, like, little, like, energetic split that you had that's like, "Okay, I really have to let this go," you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. You've absolutely nailed it. It was something that was kind of a tie to my old identity that it was time to release. And I felt the power of doing that process. And so I think it's such a good example of sometimes when we do things like it's not where we thought we were going. It's not
Mhm.
simple, it's not easy, it's not comfortable. My psychologist identity was so comforting and comfortable for
Yeah.
me. And so now I'm in, the wild, wild west of this new identity, and fully stepping into that has just been a beautiful unfolding.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you'd share a little bit about that embodiment process with us. Like, what do you think has been the biggest shift in who you're being or how you're showing up from when you were really in the identity of the psychologist to now being the psychic, the oracle, the high priestess? Like, what's been that difference for you?
Yeah, it's so many different layers. One of the components of living a priestess life is really devoting yourself to taking care of you as the priestess. And so I
Yeah.
was just thinking about this yesterday because, you knew me back when I was just starting this transition, and I was such a workaholic.
Yes,
I would
you were.
get up at like early and just work, work, work all day. And then I have two little kids, and they're in a lot of, sports and activities. So I was very worn out, and that is not the priestess way. And so now my work life looks so different. walk my dog and I get out in nature. And then I come home and I do a workout and I get my kids ready for school and spend time with them. And I really enjoy connecting with my kids so much more. I think because I'm just so much more
Mm.
resourced and energetic. And so I get them off to school and then I do a meditation practice and I might do some channeling and various processes. So I remember yesterday, I was like just doing all these things that I do. And I was getting to work and it was like 11. And I was
Yeah.
thinking like the old me would have been at my desk at like 6 a.m., okay, I need to write this blog post or, do, all the things that I was doing. So there's a very different shift in how I treat myself and how and my energy and how I spend my time. And it's all in the service of resourcing me so I can help activate and ignite and catalyze and assist who I'm working with as well, and my family and friends, everybody in my life.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, you take you everywhere. It's not just when you're working with a client, it's in the energetic, like, fabric that makes you who you are, so I love that you're like, "It's with my kids, it's with everyone." I'm curious, in your opinion, like, how would you describe a priestess, or what does being a priestess really mean to you?
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think the term is coming more into the zeitgeist now. And there are so many
Mhm.
different ways of interpreting it and different ways that it is used. But in my opinion, it's someone who has dedicated themselves to a mystical path, a feminine essence to being who has decided to dedicate their life to a mystical path and whatever that looks like to them. And in
Yeah.
the service of their own soul and their own soul's evolution, and in the service of God in whatever way that she interprets that to be.
I love that, and I would agree with that as well. I think that being a priestess or a mystic or insert whatever word you wanna use, right? Just a feminine essence being who carries the codes. I think it really is about devotion, like, to something greater than yourself, like you said, like, you're not here just for you. You're here to help humanity, you're here to help the collective, you're here to help the planet, like, there's so many different facets in how you can support evolution, but I think it's also just really letting go of, like, the masculine, like, constructs, like, way of thinking and doing and, like, it has to be da 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 da, and really, like, going into, like, the flow and the liminality and the mystery. I think that, like, the true path of a mystic is, like, when you can be so deeply rooted in faith and trust and love in the darkness, in the unknown, and still have that same devotion or love or, reverence for God as you do when you're, like, in a winning season or things are going how you think they should go. I feel like for me, specifically, that's been a huge part of my path. It's like, how deep can you surrender and devote yourself when you're in the mystery, when you're in the darkness? And I think that is, like, the biggest initiation of a priestess or of a mystic.
Absolutely. I think one of the qualities that's so important when it comes to priestess life or mystical life and the mystical feminine is cyclical living. And
Yes.
there's so many components to that, but one is, it might be a daily thing where, we don't necessarily have the same energy or the same focus every single day, the way the masculine tends to be. And so just
Mhm.
allowing ourselves to have that flow and that shift. And then there's also like the seasons of our lives. And, you have recently gone through kind of a dark night of the soul, a winter season where you allowed yourself to contract and care
Yeah.
for yourself in a very kind of solitary way, which was
Yeah.
exactly what you needed at that
Yeah.
time, and you honored that. Such a good example of this this devotion to the cyclical way of life of a priestess.
Yeah, and I think too why so many people resist that is because we make, like, the winter season or the cave season wrong or bad. Like people think, oh, because the money's not coming in, or the client, or the relationship, or whatever, then this is wrong and I'm doing something wrong. And that's not really true. It's like when you enter into these phases of liminality, it's like you're in the womb of the cosmic mother. Like you are literally like in a cauldron essentially. And it's like when you think nothing is happening, it's like truthfully, energetically on the inner planes, it's like that's when everything is happening. And it's like we need to create these seasons where we have more spaciousness, where we're in deep receptivity, when we're truly just like allowing and surrendering and letting like life or God like move to us and through us. Because sometimes it's like things have to be so shaken up in order for you to truly move. Because human beings, we don't like pain, right? Like you said,
Mhm.
I was so comfortable. That was a comfy identity. I was good there. So it's like, it's almost like we have to, unless you've been doing this work for a while, it's like you get to this point where things are so uncomfortable, or there's a breakup, or a job loss, or there's a death, there's something traumatic that happens that gets you to get into that timeline. Do you know what does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the priestess path has different priorities than our usual societies, what we consider to be important. So, society wants consistency. They want
Mhm.
very regular sources of income and money, consistent energy, continuing on, growth path, more, more, more. And
Yes.
that is not the priestess way. The priestess way is contract and expand. And so by identifying that, okay, that actually isn't my goal. My goal isn't always to grow more. Like I could have grown my psychology clinic, to another location, or I could have grown the business
Right.
larger. But I knew at that time what I needed to do was release and let go of that in order to step into this new path. So it's not the capitalist patriarchal way of being.
Mhm.
However, it is the priestess path. And I think we can also open up to the priestess path. Often God resources us in ways that are unexpected. So yes, maybe
Yeah.
we are going into our cave, and maybe our business isn't making as much money. Maybe it is. Maybe we don't need to be, present and
Yeah.
active as much and still make as much money. Also, there are lots of different ways that resources can come into our lives, through so many um, uh, different categories and ways of being. Like, for example, one of the things that happened for me was my husband started making a lot more money as I was kind of scaling back. And so
Yes.
that just allowed me space and time to be able to pursue the path that was right for me.
Oh, I love that because as soon as you were saying that, the funniest thing that happened was that it looked like from the outside looking in that my life was blowing up in smoke over this last year, right? Like if I didn't have the awareness to the path I'm on and like the cyclical nature, like I'm sure I could have went into high panic and scarcity. But I'm like, oh no, this is perfect. Like this is perfect. And also at the same time, it's like my partner got a raise and then he got another raise and then he got another raise. And it was like so many things where it's like there were so many channels coming in to show me that I am so divinely supported and guided at this time, but it's really just, like, opening up yourself to receive that and noticing, like, where you are so abundant and where God is really paving this way for you to step more into your soul destiny timeline, to embody more of your magic, right? To really come in alignment with your unique set of, like, gifts that you're here to share with the world, but it's like, you first have to stop resisting what is to find like that door or portal way into where God's trying to guide you to go. And I think when we're so resistant thinking that, oh, this is wrong or this is bad or why is this happening to me? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You miss like the medicine that God is giving you. And
Yeah.
it's like the more that you resist it, it's like it just keeps perpetuating where it's like, okay, like what's here for me? Like, how is this actually a gift? How is this actually serving me? And it's like every time I lean into that, it's like those channels of creativity, inspiration, opportunities, like everything starts happening because I'm a vibrational match for that. You
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely. And it requires a lot of trust. Trust
Yeah.
spirit, just knowing that even though this isn't, we're stepping out of the usual way of being. And, I think we often like cling to that, like, oh no, I better keep working with my clients because what if I don't have enough money to live?
Yeah.
And, when we can trust that it's going to be okay and this is what I need right now, then, all of that support comes rushing in. And it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. But I think it's hard to cultivate that trust. It's not an easy path. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's so important.
Yeah. And I like view the trust like twofold. Like one in God universe. Like I always believe that there is something bigger that is guiding me, that is supporting me, that is like holding me. Like even in the most terrible times in my life, like I can look back and see God was there and that there was something bigger at play. And I think it's also important to develop that like self-trust in yourself.
Mhm.
And it's by working it as a muscle too, because to me, it's like, even those small mundane, like, things that you don't really see as important or valuable, it's like, even in those small moments or choices, it's like every opportunity that I have to build trust in myself helps open the doors to everything that I'm desiring to experience, even if it seems so small in the minute of it or in the choice of it. It's like that's really helping me build that muscle, so when it is the big things where like this year where I had to really go against what everyone was telling me and like it looked crazy to everyone that I pulled back and wasn't really working or working with people, but I'm like, "No, this is like what I need." And I love what you shared about really like the priestess path. It's like you come first. You come first, your body, your vessel, your energy. Because if that isn't in alignment and you're not full, you can't show up in your full capacity or potency to do the work with your clients anyway. Like I would have
Mhm.
been half-assing everybody, and that's not an integrity.
Yeah, yeah. This type of work, it really requires that you have a very solid basis of
Yeah,
strength and power. And so it requires more more awareness of that, more dedication and devotion to that than the average person is doing. And so
yeah,
if someone is interested in going down the priestess path, that is something that is required. And it does require, it's one of those things where there's a lot of kind of almost paradoxical nuances
oh
to this path, right? We don't want
yes.
you to be like hustling and working hard. Like we've both had to step back from that, but also you do have to dedicate yourself to this in order to, go to that next level spiritually and emotionally and energetically. And so it's a little bit of a paradox, but I think
Yeah.
people can feel the difference there.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like outer work versus inner work, right? Like externally, it may look like you're not quote unquote like doing much, but the energetic work and the inner work and the devotion like that nobody really sees is the foundation and the most important part of what you do in the world. Do you know what I mean? To to people like, "Oh, you're not like doing anything." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm over here. I'm doing the work." Like you just but it's not for you to see that. It's for you to see how I show up and I interact with my clients and this and that, but like all the stuff that gives me the ability to do that is like it's kind of behind closed doors.
Mhm,
But
that
that
is
part is
so
so
true.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Completely nailed that. It's, there's just so much kind of energetic basis to this type of work. And yeah, it's unseen, but profoundly important.
Mhm. Yeah. What would you say if someone's listening to this and they're like, "How do I know I'm being called?" Or, "Am I a priestess?" Maybe they're getting excited, they're listening to this. They're like, "Am I a priestess? Am I being called?" What would your advice be to someone who's questioning that right now?
Mhm. Yeah. So if you feel that connection with that term, that's a sign,
Yeah,
absolutely. If you're
agree.
looking for, if you're listening to this podcast episode, I don't know
Probably
what
a
you're going
sign.
to call it, but it's a very good sign that that's probably, a code that you carry, a template that you carry. And if you're interested in that, our interests are really they're kind of beacons of light pointing you toward what your path is meant to be. And it doesn't mean that, okay, I work as an accountant right now. I need to quit that job and dedicate my life to being a priestess. You can be a priestess in any sort of job. It's a way
Yeah.
of being in this world. And so that would definitely be a sign. And if you want to begin to cultivate that, I would recommend a devotional practice that you
Mm.
engage in on a really regular basis. So that's a sign to spirit and to the universe, like, I am in for this, I am open to this. And that is kind of a starting point. And then everything, you and I, we really didn't know where our path was going.
Yeah.
We didn't know that we would end up here. You were, a bodybuilder and a personal trainer, and I was working as a psychologist, like, and so
So crazy.
yeah, it's just one of those things where life takes you on the path, so you're not going to know how it's all going to go, but start there, and then spirit will begin showing you signs. You will begin to see synchronicities. You will start to have urges to go in certain directions, and listen to those and see where it takes you.
Yeah, I love that. And I can also say that spirit is always guiding you. And it's like even things in your life, like for me, like being a bodybuilder, where I look back and I'm like, how is that correlated? But like I can look back now and think about it really taught me how to tap into my body, into my vessel, how to really care for my vessel, whether it's nutrition, movement, exercise, from coaching people. It taught me how to really like relate with people and open up to, you know what I mean? So it's like even if things in your life don't seem connected, it's like everything is always leading you to where you're meant to go and unlocking different templates or aspects of self or, little nuggets of wisdom that you need to really step into like the full emanation of your unique essence, right? Because we all have a very different essence, and there's no mistake that you are a mom and you are a psychologist and you're also a psychic, right? It's like this unique energetic mechanics that only you have because only you can fulfill your unique soul path. So
Mhm.
also look at your life and know that like it's all perfect. Even if you are like, no, this thing. No, it's all perfect and it is really helping shaping you to be like the channel, the healer, the guide that you're here to be. I really believe that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can even downplay or disregard things that are just fun, like for pleasure and joy. I think we should also have those, and I would say that's something I'm really not great at myself,
Yeah.
but
I
I
just
think that
remember
is
having a conversation with you and you're like, "Play? I don't
yeah,
even know
play
you're
has
fine."
never, even as a kid, I was like, "Let's play library. I'll be the teacher." That those were my ways of playing, and so I've had to just recognize, okay, that's me. I'm not going to be the playful person. But when we are tapped into joy, even if it has nothing to do with, your job or your work or your priestess path, we can sometimes take life a little too seriously, right? And so,
Yeah.
even if you're like you're painting or you're dancing or you're doing something that is bringing you joy and flow and alignment, that is also part of your priestess path. It's about beauty and pleasure and um, play, all of those aspects of the divine feminine.
I love that you touched on this too, because for me, like one of my pillars is like play as a devotional practice. And because I think like when we're in that like innocence of play or creativity, it literally activates different parts of you. Like it awakens like your genius and your essence. So it's like you're saying, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't seem like it's correlated to my priestess path or my business and whatever, right? But it's like when you do that, it awakens all these different parts of you that then become activated and flood into everything you do, whether it's with your kids, your business, this or that. So it's like the more that you can cultivate that, it's like you actually cultivate your essence and you awaken more of that unique energetic signature that you have to bring. So for me, I think I shared with you when we did the episode on your podcast, I started like drawing and painting again and like just like what that brought up in me and like then that starts activating like different things that I want to create and do in my business. So it's like even if it seems like there's no threads there, like trust that it is all connected and it will benefit you just to have fun for the hell of it. Like, I think as adults, we forgot that you can do things, like, just for the hell of it, not to
Yeah.
make money, not to
Mhm.
get blank, it's, like, just because I purely want to, and it's fun, and it feels good, and I enjoy it, like, you're allowed to do that stuff as an
Yeah.
adult.
And I think also, like, we've really moved into monetizing, like, "Oh, I have this passion for knitting. Now I'm gonna
Yes.
teach people how to knit." It's like, "No, you can
Yes.
have fun knitting, you don't need to make this into an online business," right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's important to remember too, that that is part of the priestess path. It's the part I'm not as good at, but, working on it. It's on my to-do list. Have fun.
I'm gonna challenge you to have fun today in whatever way that is. That's your challenge for today.
Okay.
Have some kind of fun.
Got it. Challenge accepted.
Oh. Oh, so I guess the what I wanna end with, if there is somebody here who's listening and they are really just so deep in fear, they're scared to take the plunge, they're scared to own their otherness, uniqueness, what would be your one piece of advice or one thing you wanna leave our listeners with?
Mhm. One thing that I found very helpful in my path, in embodying more of a, fearless way of being was to just do it very gradually. I think we often
Mm,
think, okay, I'm going to go from psychologist to psychic like tomorrow, and then everything's going to blow up. And so I just started, changing the copy on my website. I just started being a little bit more open with people in my life. I started talking about what I was up to when before I was just like doing it internally and not saying anything. And each time I did that, I developed more of a capacity to handle whatever came my way. And in my case, like I had very little pushback, all these
yeah,
intense fears actually, like hardly anything happened. It might have happened like without me knowing it, but it really doesn't matter. um,
right.
so by doing it gradually, you develop that ability to manage and handle and build that resiliency and tolerance to step into the next level. And then you'll find that there's a tipping point where it just becomes, it's like, you know what, this is not even an issue anymore. It's like a
Yeah,
non-issue in my life, and I can just fully step into this role. But it's often not an overnight thing. So just begin taking those baby steps in that direction, and you will start to see that all of those intense fears, they almost never happen, right? Like that's
yeah,
a psychologist strategy that, when we do the calibration of an exposure hierarchy for anxiety, for example, it's like step by step, you just start doing something, and almost always, nothing bad happens, or like the imagined outcome is like it didn't occur. It's like, oh, actually that was completely fine. And I think
yeah.
that's a lesson for all of us, that usually those imagined negative outcomes aren't there. And even if they are there, you have the capacity to handle them.
Yeah, and then I love that you just said the word capacity because as you were talking, I'm like, this is all about like building capacity in our bodies and our nervous system because if not, it's going to shock your system and it's going to feel traumatic that you're going to retract and then you're not going to take the action. So instead of making it this big thing from psychologist to psychic, right? Like that would be a huge jump to do in one day. I love that you're sharing like just leaning into those like small things like every day that you can do to start leaning in and choosing this new identity, choosing this new reality. And it's like as you do that, you build the capacity, you build, the stability, the safety in your nervous system where it gets to the point, like you said, where it's like, oh, well, this really isn't that scary. And like, oh, wow, like this thing didn't even happen. And it just feels so much easier to go into it than like such a shock to the system that makes you, essentially retract and not really fully step into where you're being guided to go. So I completely agree with that. Like if you are in deep fear or feeling the resistance, it's like start small. Like what's one way? And maybe the first thing is like you just start a devotional practice every day. Maybe that's your 1% action that you do. That's beautiful. You don't have to go out and be like, "Hey everybody, I'm going to be a priestess now." Like if you want to, that's great, but like you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So I love that you shared that. That's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so many people who I thought would be judgmental have come up to me like, I'm so fascinated by what you're doing.
Yes.
And I'll have a client reach out to connect with me, and they'll say, "Oh, I was referred by so and so." And I'm like, "So and so, huh? I thought they were going to be like the judgmental one." And they're like totally into it. So yeah, you just never know how it's going to play out. And I find now, I've so let go of that fear that I'm actually like, how can I say things that are like really, true and also wild and out there and really controversial? Because I actually find that fun now. Whereas before I was always like toning myself
Yeah.
down and pretending, I was making it so vanilla that it was like so boring. And now it's like,
Yeah.
I'm happy to bring the fire and the spark and just be controversial. It's like, you know what? Nothing bad really ever happens from that.
Yeah. And I think that being controversial can be such a catalyst for people, right? Like we try to like make it vanilla and digestible for everybody. But I know for me, like when I come across people who are like spitting straight fire, like it stops me in my tracks and like it makes me think for a second and it starts opening new doors and new pathways. So I love that you're leaning in and owning more of your, like, fire because I know you have a lot of it in there. And, I'm just curious too, for people who are listening and are curious about who you are and your work, where is the best place to connect with you? What are you offering? Like, how can we get into this psychic psychologist world? Because it's epic.
Right. So my main offering is my mastery paradigm methodology. So it's a mix of spirituality and energetics and psychology. And it is more of an intermediate to advanced sort of form of mentorship and spiritual advising. And so I do it one on one, and I'm also launching a group component to it. So I'll be launching a group offering of the same methodology in the new year. So, in order to connect with me, if people are interested, they can come to my website, which is wisdomportal.ca, or Instagram is one of the best ways to connect. So, at the Wisdom Portal. And then I also have a podcast called Therapy Wise with Dr. Jennie Ward. So, any of those places will kind of connect you to me, and you'll see what I have going on.
And I will just say, if you love podcasts, which I'm sure you do if you're listening, please go check out her podcast because she has been having the most amazing episodes where I'm like going back and listening twice. So please check out her podcast. It is amazing.
Well, thank you, Kaylin.
But yes, I love it. I'm gonna always advocate for it. But just thank you so much for being here, for sharing your light, your genius, just your medicine with us. And I am just truly honored to know you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kaylin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of the Shadow Priestess Embodied podcast. Honestly, I'm having so much fun inviting on these incredible guests, incredible speakers, and really just creating a space where I get to highlight other amazing women's genius. Honestly, that is like my life passion is really diving deep with people and really helping them to uncover who they really are at the core of their essence, really awakening them to that innate feminine wisdom and finding the courage to walk their soul led path. If this sounds like you and you are ready to live a life that is truly spirit led, the doors to my group mastermind Emergence just opened. And if you're someone who likes to go deep and wants something more intimate, I do have a few select spaces for my one on one private mentorship. And if you're not really ready to commit and you want a little taste of my world, please register for my free event, Pleasure, the Pathway to Healing, where I'm going to share with you all of my juicy, delicious secrets to live your most pleasurable, orgasmic, feminine life. Click the link in the show notes and we'll talk soon.